Hi everyone, welcome to Tinkercad session 1. Today we are going to go over the very basics of Tinkercad 3D design. So when you open the Tinkercad 3D design, what you're going to see is you're going to see a work plane on which you're going to be working. So this work plane is essentially a three-dimensional plane on which you would design three-dimensional structures and objects. Now, in terms of understanding how to work with this work plane, there are a couple of settings that we need to understand first. For example, over here on the bottom right, we see settings. So when we click on settings over here, we see that you have the units, scale, and you have the presets, which is your grid. So if we want to change our grid or if we want to make the working grid much larger, we can do that. So if we change this to, let's say, 500 by, let's say, 500, we see that our workspace has now increased quite a bit more. Okay, so you can change the size of the workspace based on your requirements. Now we see that the grid has a center point, which is your XY00 dimension, and the horizontal axis is your X dimensions, and vertical axis is your Y dimension. Since we are working in 3 dimensions, there is also a Z dimension here as well, which is the height or to move up and down. And I will show you how to manipulate that when you add an object to the workspace. Okay, now the other thing we need to also understand is the snap grid. So in the snap grid, we see that there are different kinds of snap grids we can set. It's currently set to 1 millimeter. What that really means is that each of my subsectional grid is 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter in size. And when I move my object on the surface, it's going to move in 1 millimeter steps. All right. So now today what we are going to do, we are going to create a very simple structure, but it's not a simple shape, it's a complex shape. So we have to first understand, in order to build something complex, how to simplify it into smaller shapes. So what we are going to create today is a hut. So I'm going to create a new file and visualize things in 2 dimension first. So this is my 2 dimension workspace in Microsoft Paint. So what we are going to do is visualize what a hut looks like. So let me draw the shape of a hut. So I have something like this, and then I have something like this, right? So this is my hut. So let's imagine now, what shapes is it formed out of? So first we see there is something which resembles a square, right? So this is my square. So that is one shape. And then this looks like a triangle. So that is my second shape, right? So now we can think of building a hut using a square shape and a triangle shape. But keep in mind that a square and a triangle are 2 dimension shapes, but we are going to visualize things in 3D. So how do we do that? So if we go back to our Tinkercad platform over here, now a square in 3 dimension is nothing but a cube. And if you look at the elements panel here on the right, we see that there is a cube or a box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this in, drag it in, and I'm going to place it over on the center of my workspace. Okay, so as soon as I place it on the center of my workspace, it will provide you with the length, width, and height of my shape, right? So right now the length is 20, width is 20, height is 20. So now if I have to change these dimensions, how do I do that? Correct? So what we can do is we can either put a number here. So I can make the length 40, right? Width 40. So you can see that the cube shape is changing, and I can make the height 80. So it's much taller, right? Or I'm going to just go back to making this like 60 or something. Okay, so now we see that we have changed the dimension of the shape. The other way to do that is just by dragging the corners onto the shape itself, if we don't have to be super precise about things. So what we see here are, we see 4 white dots on the corners, then we see black dots in the centers of the edges, and then we see a white dot at the top and a cone at the top as well. So let's see how to manipulate our object using these dots that are present on the object itself. Okay, so if I click on the white dot on the one of the left corners, I can drag it this way and I can make it larger. And you can see that as I'm dragging it, the dimensions are changing by 1 millimeter, and that's because that's our snap grid, right? So you can see that I can drag it this way. Okay. Now, if I click on one of the center black dots, it is a much uniform expansion. So what I do is if I do this, it stretches uniformly in one direction. Rather than just stretching one corner, it's stretching the entire edge um, in that manner. Okay, so that we can do that. And then we have this top white point over here. So this is to adjust the height. So I can use this to make the cube shorter in height or taller in height. It depends on what you want. Now, this cone over here is to move the entire structure up and down. So if I take this and I move it up, you see that from the ground, I have had a lift off, and then I can see that it's floating in the air right now, right? So that's what the cone does. So I'm going to move that back down. Okay. All right. Now, what we see on the top left over here is the view. So we have different views of the object. So we have a top view. So if I click on the top view, you can see just the top of the structure, which is, it will look like a rectangle or a square because it's again a two-dimensional shape in just the top view. And then you can just click on it, hold the click and rotate to kind of see different sides of the cube as well. If you click on front, you will move to the front of the cube. So this is a very good technique when you are starting to build multiple structures. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the size of the cube to make it uniform. So I'm going to make it like 40 by 40 by 60. Okay, so my length should also be 40. Okay, and the other thing we can also do is we can bring a scale. So if you look at this ruler tool over here, we can bring this, drag it and put it on one of the corners. Okay, so we can see that my dimensions are much larger right now. So I'm going to make them smaller, right? So I made it 40 by 40 by 60. Okay. Now we see that our center is over here and my cube has moved or shifted. So how do I move it, right? So I just hold it and then I move it right over at the center, right? So now I have a perfectly designed cube. Now, next step was to place the roof on top. So we can see that there are multiple options for us. So there's already a roof in the side panel and there is also a pyramid. So we can use both, whatever we want. I'm going to go with the roof. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it, right? And I am going to move it onto the top of the cube over here. And I'm going to drop it over there. Now I'm going to use this center black button and I'm going to stretch it to the corners like this, and then in the front, and then this way at the back. And then I'm going to take this top white um, hole and I am going to make this taller. So you can see now my dimension is changing. The other way to do it is add a ruler over here and then you can change the dimension. So the height is 20 right now. I can make it 10. It becomes shorter. I can make it 30. It becomes much taller. So that way I can manipulate the object the way I want. Okay, now you might be wondering what are these arrows over here? These are to rotate them in the plane that you want them to rotate. And this is something I will be talking about in the next video. But for now, we have designed our hut, right, with a square or a rectangular shape and a triangular shape. The other thing I want you to also keep in mind is, since this is a creative platform, you can change the color based on your needs. So right now my cube is a solid red. I can change that here to whatever I want. So if I want it to become like a solid blue, I can do that. And I can also change the transparency on it. So right now, if I keep the transparency on, then we can see inside the cube as well, right? So if I keep it off, then it's just a solid structure. Similarly, you can change the roof color as well to whatever you need. And you can also do custom colors based on your requirement as well. All right, so now that we have designed the basic HUD structure, let's see how we can add some accents to this. So I want to add like a door to my HUD. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for a door and see what they have. So they already have some preset doors into their templates. So I'm going to bring one of the doors like this. I'm going to drag it and then I'm going to place it over here. So you can see that the door is now placed on the side, and this one we can make it bigger, taller if you want. That is up to you. You can do that, right? And then on top, I'm going to create some sort of a window. So in order to create a window, what I'm going to do is I want it to be a circular window. So a circle in 3 dimensions is either a sphere or a cylinder. In this case, since it has to be pushing into the roof, I'm going to choose with a cylinder. So I'm going to bring a cylinder over here and I'm going to place it this way. I'm going to drag it and I'm going to place it this way. And then I'm going to change its dimensions. So I'm going to make the radius to be 10, or sorry, diameter to be 10. Okay. And then I'm going to change the vertical diameter also to be 10. So you can see that I changed the dimension of it, and then the height also can be reduced quite a bit, right? Okay, so now what I do is I drag it to where I want. But you can see that it has disappeared, which means it has actually gone inside my object. So you need to have a little bit visible so that it doesn't just disappear inside. So if we look from the side, this is how it looks like, right? Now, in order for this to become a hole in my um, roof, what I need to do is I need to define it as a whole. Right now it's defined as a solid object, but I'm going to change that to a whole. Okay, so this way the Tinkercad notes that it has to create a whole or subtract this object from the main roof. All right, next what I do is I already have my cylinder selected. I'm going to press shift and I'm going to select the roof as well, and then I'm going to use the union group icon over here and create a union. So when we do that, what actually happens is both the objects fuse together. And since the cylinder was defined to be a whole, the fusion actually causes subtraction, and you can see that there is a hole created over here. So this is our window that we created onto the structure. So this is how you work with Tinkercad. So in the next video, we are going to learn about aligning objects together, and we will do more of the addition and subtraction of objects into one another, in which way we can create much more complex shapes. But for now, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.